Welcome to another episode of Beta Talk. I've just realised this is the first episode in the new year, so Happy New Year, everyone. Um, Firstly, I'd like to, we've got a great guest on today. We've got Ben Watts. Now, some of you, if you use LinkedIn, might have come across Ben Watts. He's made this, well, it's very colourful. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I don't understand everything of it myself, but this very colourful dashboard, which has caused quite a bit of interest, I think, in the industry. I'm going to be chatting about what this dashboard is, what it does. Firstly, let me thank my sponsors, my guild patrons. They are Primary Pro, Wolsey, UK Radiators, Cast Rads, and Esby. So thanks to them, they help me support. They support me in doing what I do. And again, thank you to my listeners, and Happy New Year to all my listeners as well. Ben,
Hi, Nathan.
you've got a very interesting surname because it's kind of very significant to what you do. You've got this dashboard that, like I say, I find graphs quite confusing now. I don't know if it's doing my dyslexia. I don't think I did when I was at school, but yours is very interesting because it's in real time, so there's lots of things moving about. It's very colourful. But you and I had a conversation the other day, and I've been very interested in your LinkedIn articles as well. You did some good ones over the sort of 12 days of Christmas. So tell the listeners, what actually are you doing? What is this dashboard? Why do you do it?
Well, okay, where do I begin? I've worked on and off in the energy industry for kind of 15 years or so, and there's this really, really complex 24/7 kind of operation that goes on where someone in a control room is like managing what goes on the electricity grid. And there's obviously thousands of people who work in the energy industry, but there aren't that many who understand what's happening or what's happening right now. And the beauty of it is it's like a market where all the information is public and is available and is free. Um, so anyone can get it, but you need a certain amount of kind of context, domain knowledge, interpretation to kind of get the right insights and present it to people. And traditionally, I guess you would probably only get that or want that or expect that if you were potentially in a trading house, at a bank or a utility, buying and selling power as they do. Um, but I kind of thought it was time to have a go at trying to put something out there that could kind of bring that to a slightly wider audience, um, and kind of test the market to see what interests and what insights and kind of where that might lead me, really. So I guess I would say it's something that has always been on my mind as a bit of an issue, kind of a lack of understanding of what's going on there. And while I guess I probably understood 85% of it myself over the last 15 years, there's been a bit of a learning kind of piece for me and kind of trying to piece together some of the other kind of 15%.
Hmm.
So it's one of those things that's kind of been really interesting and really insightful to me as well.
I'm trying to piece
Um,
together about 95%, I think.
No, I mean, no, that's a really good point actually, because there's some really, really complicated kind of grid code, which, because obviously you've got this kind of privatized electricity grid where, once upon a time you just had everything owned by the government and, they control and own all the power plants and they had the control room. And we moved 20 or 30 years ago to having lots of different people owning them. So there's a kind of market where they all bid prices for how they're going to buy and sell power. Um, we should come into I'm being crude there. We should come into a bit of the kind of how the timing works a bit later. But you've got to have kind of, a way of presenting and disseminating all that information, like both between the different, companies that are trading power, but also, for wide public and as well.
And you're
Um,
displaying that information. Wasn't anyone doing it, or what? Wasn't anyone doing it as well as what you're doing it? Has it been
well, I
done
no,
before?
well, there are commercial kind of solutions that are, you know, people pay, quite significant subscriptions for to get information like this, and much more detailed information in lots of areas that's being used, as we speak, in quite a few trading houses and that kind of thing. So yes, is the answer. It's not new information. I guess it's a slightly new take on it in certain ways. Obviously, one of the things that's quite prominent is the kind of current cost of the constraints. And that's something that's probably not directly relevant to a trader that's kind of interested in how much money they're getting for the power they're selling, or how much they're paying for power they're buying, whatever. But it is kind of relevant to NESO, the renamed bit of national grid that looks after what's on the network. It's interesting to policymakers. It's interesting to people who are interested in net zero and trying to get as many of the electrons that are coming out of our wall plugs kind of green as possible, as cheap as possible. Because obviously, in the last couple of years, I'm sure a lot of listeners on this podcast will have a passing interest in kind of some of the kind of growing challenges on the grid as we kind of connect more renewables to it. The best documented is the kind of constraints between Scotland and England. I mean, the kind of Hadrian's Wall kind of boundary is the best known of those constraints. It's called the B6, but there are others kind of north-south as well, which kind of, to a lesser or greater degree, are kind of problems as well. So there are problems getting power kind of broadly out of the Highlands into the kind of the central belt. There are problems getting power from kind of the borders across into England. There are some constraints within England as well, going north-south. And then there are constraints from East Anglia, where there's a lot of wind in the North Sea coming kind of into or further west and southwest towards London. Can be constraints from around London and then kind of between Kent and the continent as well. So it's quite a complicated kind of issue. And if you look back kind of 15, 20 years, the kind of balancing of the electricity system was kind of mostly about kind of just resolving errors when a power plant unexpectedly tripped or broke, which can happen, or when there are kind of errors in how much electricity demand has been forecast, which happens. And obviously that happens a lot more now that we're not just trying to forecast how much electricity is going to be used, we're also trying to forecast how much wind and solar generation is going to be on the grid at any one point. And obviously there are very, very smart people working very hard on trying to improve the accuracy of those forecasts. But in order to know how much solar and wind we're going to make at any particular second, you need a 100% accurate kind of weather forecast for every square mile of the country, and that's difficult. So there are challenges around that, but there are also challenges around the kind of north-south kind of constraints, and the reason that's kind of flared up and is in the media very often these days is basically we allowed the big new wind farms in the North Sea and in Scotland to connect to the grid before the grid had been reinforced and before the grid was kind of ready to handle the electricity that they pulled out. And the reasons for that were that you had to do that in order to get the developers to invest the billions of pounds that we invested in building those wind farms. But the problem is that we haven't built enough kind of transmission capacity to actually move the electrons line of north and south. Yeah, it's difficult, and it's frustrating because no one wants to waste wind power. No one wants bills to be higher because you've got to compensate both the wind farms to turn off, and you've got to compensate, or you've got to pay gas generally fired power to ramp up, particularly in the south of England, to kind of make up the shortfall. So it's quite an expensive process. It can be costing hundreds of thousands of pounds every half an hour. I haven't got a figure for what happened in the calendar year 2025, but I think it's going to be in the order of like 1 or 2 billion. So it's a lot. Um,
Your dashboard's looking at all the looking at the all the CCGTs, isn't it? Combined cycle gas turbines, and it's sort of. I mean, I don't understand any of this. Like, and probably some of my listeners are going to be like you and really get all this. But and I suppose that's something to talk about. Most people in this country, obviously, we're using it energy all the time. Don't really understand how it gets to us. Obviously, similar with water. Now, I kind of understand that because I'm a plumber. But this whole electricity thing, getting it generation, wholesale supply. I mean, you were talking about how we're now private. We've got these verticals going on, haven't we? Because we've got gas producers that get it, extract it. They can sell it kind of to themselves because they're the wholesalers as well, and then they sell it to themselves as well because they also they own these CCGT power plants. I mean, I think with people like BP and Shell. I mean, I think they're in these verticals, aren't they? They actually produce it. They're a wholesaler, and they own some of the combined cycle turbines. I think, don't they?
Uh, I think they have done in the past. Like I
Who
think.
owns the turbines then? Who? I mean,
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think in a lot of the time, gas the contracting of gas turbines is quite complicated, and I think in many cases it's a little bit like the airline industry, where you'll have you know very long term kind of complicated servicing and maintenance agreements between the owner of the power plant and the maker of the turbines, which would typically be like GE or Siemens or someone like that. Like it's a little bit like if anyone's familiar, like how kind of airline kind of engines work when you kind of buy them from GE or Rolls-Royce or someone like that. I just want to interrupt here to say that I'm an economist, I'm not an engineer. So I will answer those questions as intelligently as I can. But I think going back to what you just said, Nathan, there's a chance you might know more about some of those things than I do.
well,
Um,
I
but no, I
don't.
mean, no, I think it is an interesting point because a lot of the CCGTs that were built and installed in the UK kind of during the dash for gas and the kind of noughties were financed and built on the expectation that the power plants would be running kind of base load, which is a term to mean kind of all the time. And the reality is that they're just not. And they're not because partly, actually, electricity demand is nowhere near as high as we thought it was going to be. I'm
Oh,
going to the reason for that. The second is obviously we've got all these renewables on the system. So the gas gets pushed off whenever there's enough wind or enough solar. Or, and that's not just in the UK, that can be in the continent as well because we have a lot more connection with Europe than we did like 10 or 15 years ago. So yeah, I mean the challenge for the owners of the gas plants is they're turning up and down a lot more than they used to, and they're also having to turn off more than they used to, and that's bad for turbines, it's bad for efficiency, it's bad for maintenance, like, and it does sadly drive more cost onto bills. So there are there are I guess wherever you look at whatever stage of this kind of whole kind of coordinated second by second kind of dance that happens to keep the lights on, there are challenges. Um,
we should tell people what your site is. It's kilowatts.io. Have I got that right?
that's right, yeah.
That .io is you techies love that top level domain name, I think, didn't you?
It's .ai is definitely taking over now, but yeah, .io has been around for a while. It's actually the domain for the British Indian Ocean Territory, Diego Garcia, which I think's just become part of Mauritius. So I don't know if I'm going to get the domain name taken off me at some point, but it's definitely trendy for people in the tech space. Yeah.
So,
Um,
and your dashboard, it's got all sorts, and like I say, it's extremely colourful. I mean, my sort of brain likes looking at things like that. But like I say, I don't really understand everything that I'm looking at all. But it's listing these power plants in these combined combustion gas turbines. I mean, I suppose I mean, obviously, some people probably don't know much about them, including me. I mean, I know they've got the kind of two turbines. They've got a combustion turbine and a steam turbine, so that they're sort of doing sort of they're more efficient. I mean, what I do know, which is interesting because this is to do with heat, which is what I do know about, is I met a guy once. He knows my daughter's mum quite well, and he goes around all these um, gas turbines and demineralizes the water that's used in the steam turbine for the generator, because obviously you don't want them turbines. I mean, I should imagine they cost a lot of money to make these things, and you don't want them corroding or things like that. So demineralization is popular in that industry, and obviously some of us engineers we're trying to get demineralization recognised as a good way of preventing corrosion in your heating systems. At the moment, our country is obsessed with chemical inhibitors, and that's fair enough. There's some good ones, but they're not used how they should be used, I don't think. Whereas some of the engineers on the guild are demineralising their water to protect it, because it takes all the minerals out, and it sort of attenuates the electrical path for corrosion to happen. So you take the minerals out of the water, and you get less corrosion. And that's what they do, as far as I know. When I was chatting to this guy, that's what they do at the power plants: demineralise the water for the steam turbines. So that's about all I know about gas turbine plants. Um, you're listing on your dashboard all of them, aren't you? And the dashboard tells us what they're doing, if they're generating, and cost. I mean, you're an economist, I'm not, so I don't think I'm even going to talk about how the market works.
No, well, yeah, let's do into that a bit. Firstly, a couple of interesting things like the costs of the actually buying the turbines has absolutely exploded in the last couple of years, and the reason is that everyone wants to generate more power, and in particular, they want to generate more power for AI data centers. And data centers struggle to get connections to the grid that are big enough for the amounts of power that they need. So some of them are thinking, well, I'll build my own power station on site, or they're going to a utility and saying, well, look, let's share a site and you build something next to me, and maybe I'll get a
Yeah.
more a cheaper power supply that kind of bypasses the grid. Now, there's a separate debate as to whether that's a good idea or not. But actually, yeah, it's very difficult, and the order books for buying gas turbines for power plants are, at kind of record levels at the
Oh
moment.
wow.
So
Yeah.
it's quite interesting. And obviously, like, there's also trade-offs between, you know, going for a slightly cheaper kind of install, which will be lower efficiency, potentially something you use only at peak times when, it's cold and there's no wind, and something like the more traditional kind of approach we took, we, built something to maximize efficiency on the assumption that you were going to run it all the time. So, for investors and people trying to build a plant, it's quite difficult to kind of choose between those two these days because I mean, you don't really know what kind of world we're going to be in 2030 or 2035 or whatever. Um, but yeah, going back to kind of how they run and how they schedule and stuff like that. Obviously, we have kind of privatized commercial market for buying and selling power, and the different bits of the energy companies, whether that's a supplier, a retailer, or a generator, can buy and sell power between each other, kind of over the counter, kind of bilaterally, with PPAs, which are kind of like power purchase agreements. They're very, very popular for renewables, wind and solar, and they kind of tend to be a longer term arrangement that kind of underpins the financing of those projects. But
I'm
then when you
smiling.
get
I'm smiling, Ben, because you're getting into that economic territory
no,
again.
no, no, it's fine. But like coming back to the dashboard
I mean, it's important,
and the
obviously.
kind of that like the kind of real time of what happens each day. Um, the power is traded in half-hour blocks in the UK.
Right.
So from on the hour to 30 minutes, and from 30 minutes to start the next hour. And so for the power that's being delivered at say 3 o'clock this afternoon, or from 3 o'clock till half three, that kind of settlement period, as it's called, at so an hour before the start of it at 2 o'clock, um, National Grid kind of, or NESO as it is now, says, hey, all power stations, all electricity suppliers, buying and selling large amounts of power. How much are you intending to generate in each minute of that period? Show us your cards. and also tell us how much you would like if we decide to ask you to generate a bit more or a bit less. And it's a bit like a kind of sealed bid auction. Um, all of those go into the pot. And once they get into the NESO computer system, to call it that, um, they also then get disseminated to everyone who's in the market who's looking at what's going on. That includes my website, but obviously more significantly everyone else that's in trading power in the sector. And then when you actually get to that 3 till 3:30 period, what they do to keep the lights on and keep the grid balanced and so on is they look at how much the imbalance is on the grid, and they look at the offers that they've got to buy and sell power, and they try and pick the right combination to, well, keep the lights on, keep the grid balanced and therefore the frequency at 50 hertz, and then also kind of manage any constraints that are on the network because of the transmission problems that I kind of referred to earlier in our call. So
And
they're kind of constantly doing these things.
these are all algorithms doing all this. I mean, it's not actual people making the decisions very quickly. I should imagine it's all AI and algorithms doing all this, isn't it?
It's a bit of a hybrid, actually. So yeah, I was very fortunate in December to be invited to have a little tour of the control room. And yeah, it's slightly hallowed ground for people who work in the industry. A lot of people will give you very fond kind of stories of when they've gone there, or maybe when they worked there, or things like that. I mean, traditionally, it would have been done manually, and they would have been looking at individual kind of power plants and ordering them up and down, probably on a computer, but they would have been a human would have been executing kind of individual decisions. One of the things that's changed a lot in the last kind of 4 or 5 years is we've gone from an electricity system where you have, like, I don't know, 20 or 30 turbines kind of doing the majority of the work, and therefore things that you can have in your head, um, to a system where you've got like quite a few smaller wind farms, as well as some mega ones that are as big, if not bigger, than power stations, but also a lot more smaller kind of batteries, but also some other kind of virtual power plants, if you might like. But interestingly, that can include things like heat pumps. So you can pool a group of heat pumps as an electricity supplier, or kind of a virtual electricity supplier, so to speak. And you can say, well, I've got this group of heat pumps, or I've got these PV inverters in houses or offices or whatever. And actually, if National Grid wants to use a bit more power or use a bit less power from the grid in a particular minute, or kind of, for the 10, 20 minutes or whatever it is, in exchange for a payment, I'll ramp what I'm doing up or down. And for a heat pump, that could be there's some excess power on the grid. I'm going to run it like the clappers for 10 minutes, and I'm going to take the flow temperature up to 50 degrees, but that's fine because I'm getting this power very cheaply. Or equally, and probably easier to understand, like, a power station's just tripped. Um, the wind is nowhere near as much on the system as we thought it would, and it's 5:30 in the evening, and everyone's cooking their dinner. The grid short of power. Heat pump, will you turn off for half an hour? Sure. And with the thermal mass of most buildings, most people will probably be absolutely fine with that. So there's lots of kind of, I'm going to say, integration pathways, which is a term I absolutely hate, but there's I think traditionally people thought about the grid as big power stations and hydro plants, pump storage, like places like Dinorwig in North Wales. Like, a lot of people will tell you stories about how when there's an advert break on TV, like Dinorwig turns on, right? Particularly if it's an England football match. Um, but yeah, no, like the role of the grid now is like that there are lots more small kind of bits of the grid that are responding in real time to what's going on. And yeah, that could be heat pumps for your audience. It could also obviously be PV batteries, it could be EV chargers. All of that can kind of flex, which I use as a verb to say kind of like change how much energy it's going to use compared with what it was planning or expecting to use. So change your plan in order to be compensated somehow.
Now, who are you?
Have I lost you?
No, no, well, depends what path I wanted to go down. I've gone down loads of them. Who has found your dashboard useful? Because I think there has been some people that have found it quite useful, isn't it?
uh, uh, uh,
Or aren't you
I mean,
allowed?
I've got okay. No, I can't say it. Like, okay, I've got a few hundred people signed up for the beta mobile app, which if anyone goes to the website, they can sign up for. And the way apps work, like there's a general release where everyone can see stuff in the App Store, but then before that, there's kind of a testing kind of release. So yeah, that's one metric which has exceeded my expectations, but it's kind of constantly growing. So that's been good. Um, I mean, I've had people engage with me from a lot of energy companies, consultancies, people who work in government, people who work at the regulators, people from overseas, to be honest. I think we forget sometimes GB is like it's quite a forerunner in a lot of ways in terms of like liberalizing, privatizing, adopting technology, adopting batteries.
Oh
So
yeah,
there's
yeah.
some interest from overseas, which is good. And then, as I mentioned earlier, like NESO themselves had obviously seen it. So yeah,
Yeah, we're definitely. I mean, we were the world's first to ship LNG across a sea. It came into Canvey Island, didn't it? That was the first ship in the world. Someone I know someone that was on that ship. Talk about ships. Funny that I only found out the other day. My favourite heating engineer in the country, heat pump heating engineer. His first job when he left school was on one of the survey ships. So in the 70s, I think it was Decker were doing some surveying for planning and plotting where the pipe, the gas pipe was going to come from the Frigg Norwegian gas field. I think. I didn't know this the other day. So he's now in heat pumps, but he was because I mean as you would know, I mean the UK has quite a bit of our gas come from Norway. I say quite a bit compared to other European countries. So we've got that pipeline. I mean, maybe we could talk a little bit about that because we got LNG. You did something today about LNG. It's got more carbon emissions
yeah.
because it obviously
Well,
hasn't processed
you're
the.
right. I mean, yeah, you're right. At the moment, just looking at my dashboard, I think yeah. So 32% of our gas is coming from LNG. Um,
Hmm,
so the other 68% is coming from the North Sea. And that's obviously split between the British fields and the Norwegian fields.
right.
And they come into various terminals on the East Coast.
Where do we get our LNG? Qatar. I mean, I think that's where our first. No, America was our first ever shipment in 1959.
Um, I haven't looked at these figures for 6, 12 months, but it's US and Qatar. Qatar was definitely more a few years ago. I think the US is kind of like, you know, pretty dominant there now for
I think
us.
they're the largest exporter of LNG. I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Again, I'm getting into territory I don't know nothing
I'm,
about.
I'm I'm not an LNG expert.
I'm not.
It's funny enough that you can. I would say to anyone listening, like you can go on there's a website called Marine Traffic, which is a bit like what's it called? What's the one for tracking planes? It's the equivalent of that.
Right.
But you can look at where the LNG boats are,
Oh, right.
tankers,
Yes.
and you can see if they're unloading at the two LNG terminals in the UK in real time. So one of them's, well, actually there are two at Pembroke, South Wales, and then there's the Isle of Grain in Kent as well. Um, so yeah, you can look at those if that's of interest. I mean, you tend to see a lot more of them in the winter than in the summer
What?
because obviously gas demand is very seasonal.
No, you were listening to my podcast, so we've been chatting for a while on LinkedIn, and you were telling me about this idea a while ago about this dashboard and this API, and where can you see it being useful? What sort of cohorts of people will it be useful for? I mean, because I'm in this whole world of heating, so that's kind of my niche. That's what I talk about. But obviously, the technology we use and uses electricity, so that's an important thing. And I know lots of people that seem to know a lot about it. Adam Bell, who I've had on the show, and Madeline from Nesta. All you guys seem to know about all this electricity distribution and generation and price and wholesale price. Most of us don't. Where do you see where do you see any challenges? When we've talked about distribution, we've got constraints on the grid. What do we have to solve as a country to get this right? And maybe we can chat about prices because obviously that's a big thing. The prices.
Well, how long is it till Christmas, Nathan?
Well,
Ah,
it won't be that long. That does come around very quickly.
yeah. Um, right. Okay. I'm going to answer this thinking about some of the issues that are going to be particularly resonant to people in the heat pump industry. Um, I think one of the big problems is that electricity is too expensive. Sure, there are pretty well rehearsed arguments on this podcast why that's the case, but kind of specifically within the wholesale market, one of the things that drives the cost of electricity up a lot is that the gas power stations have to pay for carbon credits effectively. They actually have to they have to pay two separate kind of carbon taxes, which you don't have to pay if you burn gas in a boiler, at least as a household. It's just, I mean, it's basically 5% VAT on domestic gas, and nothing else really. Most of the policy levies are on electricity, which again, I'm sure someone on your podcast has talked about that stuff to you before, so I won't bore or reiterate people with that. But yeah, so that's one of the big challenges. Like, I think we kind of demonize gas-fired power generation more than we should do. Like, I think the reality is, if you look at, sometimes it's windy, sometimes it's not. We haven't cracked how to store large amounts of electricity for weeks and months at a time yet. Obviously, it'd be fantastic when we do. And there are some people that think we can do that with, iron, air kind of stuff. There are people who are into compressed air. There are people who are into hydrogen. And for what it's worth, I think I'm not a fan of the idea of hydrogen in domestic homes, but I think it probably has a role further up the energy system. Um, so there's all that. Um, but there are going to be times when we need gas-fired power from the grid. And actually, I don't think it's necessarily like the enemy of a heat pump. You look at the efficiency of a gas-fired power plant, about 50%, and you combine that with a heat pump at 300 or 400%, hopefully. It's still a pretty efficient way of burning gas, and it's better than a gas boiler. So obviously, all that capital investment is expensive. Having a wind farm and a gas plant and the transmission grid and the upfront cost of the heat pump, and that's another challenge, which something that sure comes up on your podcast in other episodes. How to cut the cost of installing heat pumps and that kind of thing, how to boost the efficiency. But certainly when you look at the grid side of things, I think that's one of the really important things that, like, we have, about a third of our electricity is coming from gas, but we're taxing it quite highly.
I've got a question for you,
Yeah.
Ben. It was today I read something. It was what were they? An internet, not an internet service provider, the domain provider, and basically they said their data centers use 100% renewable energy. I
Yeah.
mean, and they can make that claim, can they? Because they know exactly where things. I mean, you said earlier that sometimes data centers have their own little power stations now, I suppose, or generators. I mean, can someone make that claim that all their power is coming from 100% renewables?
Um, I'm
Or
not an expert on carbon accounting and that kind of thing. Um, I think a couple of things kind of pertinent to say. Like one of them is like for years and years and years, the big, cloud companies have been massive buyers of renewable energy on long-term PPA contracts. So, AWS, Google, GCP, Microsoft Azure, people like that have they've bought power, and they've given wind farms in many cases like effectively, a very bankable, creditworthy creditworthy company that they know that they could sell their power to for a long period of time, and that's enabled them to get the finance and build and develop projects and that kind of thing. So, it wouldn't surprise me if the provider you're referring to has maybe kind of taken that path. Um, Obviously, there are times when there is less renewable power on the grid than someone would like, and then you can get into um, you know various debates about where which electrons you can claim and which you can't, and that kind of thing. Um, you know, I think the big challenge in that sector really is the growth of AI in terms of how much more computing power that actually takes than the traditional kind of, I say traditional, but kind of traditional cloud computing, databases, websites, things like that. AI is an order of magnitude bigger in terms of how much power it needs because it's thinking, you know, and yeah, that's their big challenge going forward. And it's the big challenge for the grid as well, because like to some extent, there's a competition for the electricity that's available between things like AI data centers and heat pumps or EVs or um, you know, um, so yeah, it's a challenge.
So the AI, yeah, that's become sort of quite a new thing to think about for energy, I suppose, because it's gonna use a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, and obviously, the UK having very high electricity prices compared with both other parts of Europe and like North America in particular, like it's quite a challenge for the UK. Um, yeah. Again, that's the reason why I think we should be pulling some of these taxes off the gas-fired power plants, if I'll be honest. And
So
that's as somebody who wants to, I want to decarbonize and I want to green stuff up, but I think like, yeah, it's misplaced.
for the listener that's not got a computer in front of them, just give people a visual representation of what your dashboard looks like, because you've got all sorts of things. But give a few little indicators of what people can see if they look at it.
Wow, I mean, you can see the current mix of like the grid, like, 30-40% coming from gas and 30% from wind, and then 15% is being imported. Like that's stuff you can see elsewhere. You can see the frequency of the grid in real time. You can see how much kind of spare capacity there is. That obviously get low on kind of really cold days without much wind and sun. You can see the wholesale gas price, which is currently about £25 megawatt hour. So what's that, 2.5 pence?
Straight over my head, this.
No.
As
Well,
soon as
no, it's
that
no, no,
wholesale pricing is what really confuses me, but I don't have to think about it. But it's obviously it's very very important, very important. I mean, this whole way the market moves, because we're all about the reason our energy department's got the name it has. It's about energy security. We have to be energy secure. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, we've got all these power plants now. There's all sorts of things, and they're all and it's all this market way of how that all works and costs. That's very very, I imagine, quite confusing to most people. It definitely confuses me. I mean, it doesn't. You studied economics at Cambridge, so it doesn't confuse you, does it? But it's very interesting. I mean, because we are privatised in this country, then is that? Let's ask that question. Do countries that aren't private, have private generation? It's generation generated by the state. What's the interplay there? What are the differences? Are they fors? Are they against for that?
So one of the really big ironies of the last 10 years, right, is that there's the kind of British Thatcherite kind of privatization and people call it unbundling, where you kind of like separate out these, we call them suppliers, retailers would definitely be a better term. generators, and then the owners of like the networks, National Grid, and I don't know, SSE or Scottish Power, whatever. Um, that model basically got adopted by the EU and imposed on European countries. And then, of course, Britain decided to leave the EU. So if you kind of put those things together, like you actually see there are quite a lot of elements of what goes on in Europe that's kind of mimicking the British system or the British system as was. And obviously, like, lots of things have changed since then. But yeah, I mean, I'm not really an expert on North America, so I probably wouldn't comment that directly on that. But one of the things you do see that's different in North America compared with Europe is obviously because it's a much bigger country, you have much more regional kind of markets. So there's no kind of nationwide grid. There are kind of regional ones, one in Texas, like a New York one, California one, a Midwest one, Pennsylvania and a couple of other states have one. So, and then within that, you actually have kind of like different nodes and different zones that can be relatively small. Now, interestingly, that's something the UK was thinking of doing, and was thinking about doing for years and years and years, and finally rejected last year, in my opinion. And that was quite a divisive topic. Like a lot of very experienced people in the industry thought it would have been catastrophic. It would have been a big kind of legal problem for a lot of the existing kind of wind farms and stuff that are out there. Um, from my personal perspective, like I think it would have been pretty challenging, but probably would have resolved quite a lot of the issues that we have with too much wind having in Scotland and things like that. So I think it's a bit of a shame we kind of ruled that out. But yeah, I mean, there are differences. If you look around Europe, there are some countries with very different generation mixes to each other and to us. Most people listening to this will know that the French grid's like almost all nuclear, with quite a bit of hydro, which is very helpful. Kind of acts a bit like a battery. And France has a lot of links to other countries, like 3 cables to us, but probably 3 or 4 times as many across the border into Germany, quite a few into northern Italy, and a few to Spain, Belgium. So France is important. Germany traditionally had a lot of coal power and a lot of nuclear power, and has pulled out of nuclear, built a lot of wind and solar, and therefore now has quite volatile power prices. So combined with being such a big market, it kind of drives a lot of what's going on in the rest of Europe. Um, France has a lot of electric heating,
Mm,
as you probably know, a bit like Norway. Um,
mm.
but Norway obviously has a lot of hydro. Um, so
They have a lot of gas. They sell it to us, don't they?
yeah, well, they don't use it themselves. It's like that. Was it? There's something like 90% EVs now, in 98% EVs in Norway, something like that.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of variety around there. And yeah, I mean, you'll find there are quite a few countries in Europe where the spark gap and stuff like that for installing heat pumps is a lot better than it is in the UK. Um,
Yeah, I mean
um,
that's interesting because I mean, like I say, I don't know anything about this. I would have said our energy is a little bit more secure than some other countries because I mean, you mentioned Germany. I mean, some countries were relying a lot on Russia. I mean, it's the biggest gas producer on the planet. I think, is it Gazprom? And the Nord Stream pipeline coming to. Again, I'm in territory I don't know a lot about, but we weren't relying on them as much as others. I mean, we've got the pipeline from Norway, and yet our electricity prices are the highest. And again, we're getting into economic territory because I just don't understand it. I try. Um,
the reason our electricity prices are high is because there are lots of taxes and charges and levies that are kind of in various ways on the electricity bill, and they're paying for a whole bunch of things. Um, I guess the biggest are going to be, the subsidies and the supports to the older wind and solar farms, plus the newer ones, those kinds of things like that. That's and then also the cost of like beefing up the grid. Like, so it's broadly those costs that are driving things up.
Let's ask another question. And what's in your
Yeah.
economic opinion? Can the prices come down easily? I mean, we're always talking about attenuating this. Well, everyone talks about it. Lots of reports mention it. Um, can it be brought down easy enough?
Um, I guess for your audience that's interested in heat electrification, I guess the answer to that's in two parts. Like one is, can you bring down the cost of electricity? And I guess the answer to that is just referring to my previous answer. If you could move some of those levies and costs somewhere else, then you could. And I guess the second part of the answer to that question is, well, could you move them onto gas or could you move them onto heating oil or LPG? And I guess the answer to that's kind of political. Like you could, but I sense the fact that it's not been done suggests that it would be, you know, quite a hard kind of political act for any government to try and undertake.
You've got a heat pump, Ben, haven't you? You've got a heat
I
pump. That's
do, I
evenly.
do, yeah. I've had one nearly 4 years.
Forgot what
Yeah,
you
a
got.
long
I want
time.
to say Mitsubishi.
Yes, I do.
Mitsubishi, yes.
Yeah, I'm very happy with it. I live in the highest village pretty much in the country. So it's cold. Um, our heating season's definitely a bit longer than other places. Um, and yeah, I've got a battery as well, an EV, a couple of different PV systems. So yeah, my household bills are low. The house has always been warm and comfortable. And yeah, like no regrets from my perspective with heat
Yeah,
pump.
you had a good installer then.
Yeah, I'll shout them out. They're probably listeners. Called Rico Energy, and they're based in Devon. Or I think they might be Devon and Cornwall actually, on the border. But yeah, very good install. I think they're quite long established, so definitely, you know, not people that have jumped into the market in the last kind of 2 or 3 years, so to speak. But yeah, they did a great install. I was quite conscious actually when they installed it that they took account of the climate where we live. So I
Hmm.
think on the standard temperature tools, you get like temperatures for Plymouth, which is only 10, 12 miles from my house, but 400 meters lower and by the sea.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was good. I actually talked about that. I wrote a chapter for a book from the Renewable Heating Hub guy, Mars Milowski. I talked a bit about the install that we had, if anyone's interested. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate of residential kind of decarbonisation and stuff. I do think there are big challenges there, and I don't. I'd love to say it's ready for everyone, and I don't think it quite is yet. Um, you know. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of scaremongering and uh, myth truths and out there about heat pumps and in particular, but kind of EVs and stuff as well. So yeah.
Yeah, there is. I mean, whether that's well, whether that has an effect on the market as much as what we all think, because obviously, the big players that have come into this industry, spent millions and millions on marketing and sales, etc. I mean, I'm thinking of Era. Era have scaled back massively since they. I got invited to their Parliament announcement. Um, so, I mean, yes, luckily for me, the engineers I really, really value and care about, these small SMEs type, they've got good order books at the moment. I think it depends where you are in the country. But they're not struggling yet. But I mean, it's always been historically hard for these big players to come into this sort of kind of sector, um, and that's still happening. So there's a couple of other companies that kind of got out of heat pumps. I'm not going to mention their names yet because I want to just make sure that's okay. But they pulled out as well, and like I say, Air massively scaled down, massively. Um, so it'll be interesting to see what they're going to be doing. But yeah, you're right. I mean, but whether it's interesting. Do the myths put people off, or I mean, some of my best friends obviously kind of know what I do. I talk a lot, talk for a living, and yeah, when I say to them about heat pumps, as much as they know, I know, I could get them really good engineers, etc., etc. But they still don't go for it, and they aren't the ones reading the myths in these papers. They don't read papers, half of them. So that sort of environment isn't around them. I think that the myth environment is still around sort of the early adopters. The people that are really interested in stuff. They're the ones that are going to encounter it. Yes, your average reader might come across a bad story in the newspaper and think, oh yeah, what's all that about? But as we know, most people aren't thinking about their heating at all. They never do, unless it breaks down. So thousands of engineers will be out today attending broken systems. But apart from that, most people never generally think about their heating at all, which is quite interesting from a human from a anthropological perspective, I suppose, because humans throughout for hundreds of thousands of years have thought about keeping themselves warm, because otherwise you died. Now we live in these houses, we don't really think about it. We pay the bills, and people's bills aren't seen; they come out of a direct debit. So there's just no interaction, no thought processes going on around keeping warm, and like I say, until it breaks. So when you get people feel like it's getting imposed on. When people think, right, we're being told we've got to have this new technology, and how much does it cost? That's where all the sort of trouble comes. So there's a massive behavioural sort of piece around this.
I
And
think,
go on.
yeah, I guess the caveman, right, would have spent 20% of every day searching for firewood, right? Which is what, 20% of their income. Like, I mean, there are some feel poor houses that will be spending 20% of their income now, and that will bite, right? But I guess for a lot of us, it's that percentage is quite a lot lower. And I guess the other thing is you sink a lot of the capital cost into building the system and then don't really think about it. And some of that like is the original install of the radiators in your house when it was built or when central heating was first put in. Part of it actually is stuff you just don't really think about because it's not your problem, like the gas pipes in the street and the gas meter and stuff like that, which aren't really your responsibility. Um, but yeah, I think there's something interesting, like yeah, stuff like petrol, people have much more of an idea of how many liters, what that volume is, and how much they're using. In a
Oh,
way that, yeah, even with smart metering, like I don't think most people know how much gas they're using or like what volume it is, or like, most people don't know what a kilowatt hour is. You I think, yeah, maybe that's a shame. I mean, maybe that's something stuff like my dashboard kind of helps with at some level. But I mean, there are lots of conversions you've got to kind of be doing in your head to kind of move between, you know, end user kind of kilowatt hour quantities and megawatt hour quantities on the grid or gigawatt hour,
gigawatt.
or,
How many gigawatts are we using at the moment on your dashboard?
oh, it's going to be about 40 gigawatts, something like that, I would have thought. Um, yeah, I mean, it's cold-ish and it's relatively windy. Um, I think the storm we had, it was Friday night for January today. So there was a storm yesterday, probably in the west of England, and it's kind of moved further east, and now it's kind of actually passing over most of our wind farms, which are in the North Sea. um, but yeah, no, I've had the same experience I think you just mentioned there, where like I've had quite a few friends or family or whatever that have been quite curious about a heat pump, but I don't know anyone that's kind of made that same switch. Um, Actually, my in-laws bought a house that had a heat pump, and I suspect probably at some level they were given some reassurance of that by the fact that we already got one.
Yeah.
Um, but no, I think you're right. I think a lot of people probably will have it in mind next time they need to replace their boiler. But then when it actually comes to that decision, particularly if it's
Yeah.
a distressed one,
I,
I'm not sure.
it's interesting because obviously I've been talking. My podcast is 6 years old, and funny enough, someone sent me this link. I'm top of some podcast list around the world for what we talk about, so that's nice. But yeah, it's very interesting. What I was going to say is, and I completely forgot what I was going to say.
It's Friday afternoon, don't
My
worry.
brain just went from one thing to the other there. What was I? What remind me what you were talking about, and then I'll see if it'll spark something in me because it
Oh,
was
I was thinking someone gets around to actually having to install their boiler. Like, if
that's
you
that's
replace
what
the
I was
boiler,
thinking.
are they going to go for
That's
heat?
That's what I was thinking. So I'm not going
Yeah,
to name names. So obviously I've been doing my podcast a long time. I know a lot of people have been talking about electrification of heat, but and
yeah.
some of them are on very, 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 very good money. You know, that's their job to talk about it, discuss it, work about it. And this winter, their boiler's broke. They aren't getting a heat pump. Now, these are the people that get paid to talk about electrification heat pumps for most of society, and I know they've got the money, and it comes back to this thing. Most people, even the people talking about heating, actually in their own homes, aren't kind of aware. Some are, but yeah, the boiler goes, they get a new boiler because job done, easy peasy. And it's always very strange for me because obviously I don't, there's a part of me who wants to call them out, but that's horrible if I did that. So it's up to people what they want to buy, rah, rah, rah. But it is very interesting. So these people are the ones that know these myths are wrong. They've been talking about electrification of people's domestic heat. You know, that's their job. And yet in their own properties, and they can have a heat pump. It's not like they're in some sort of, they're not renting their flat and it's not their property. This is their own property. Um,
Mm.
there's a couple of very prominent people that always come into my mind when I say things like this, which is why I think my brain, because I probably shouldn't say things like this or even allude to it, which I think was why my brain completely forgot what I was going to talk about. Perhaps I should have said it. Yeah, but it is weird. It is strange for me. You know, people
I
because
think no, look, there's a couple of things there, right? First is a lot of people have got a partner or another half who might not share
yeah,
their
oh yeah,
enthusiasm or interest in these things. The second is like what comes happens if you come to sell your house, and like I'll be lying if the thought hasn't gone through my head a bit. Like my heat pump costs me £200 or £300 a year to run, which is great. I think gas would be a grand or more. But that is contingent on me having a battery. The servicing is definitely a lot more expensive. I mean, I don't pay gas standing charges, but I think all things equal, like my house, which is a modest prefab semi-detached house, is going to be a curious one if I ever had to sell it. Like, and the maths on the payback of the heat pump is kind of it hinges on quite a few different things sitting together and staying together, like the battery, like the overnight tariffs, things like that. So I mean, there are challenges there.
mm. Oh yeah, it's a very big behavioural piece. And there's all sorts of things going on why people wouldn't have something. Let's say even if they talked about it for a living. Um, You
Well, I
know,
think,
I'm the case in point. I mean, I've got to convince my landlord that it would be a good option, and I know my land. He's like one of my best friends. I know him really, really well, and he knows kind of the job I do. But he's like saying, "No, no, you got your boiler," and he's my landlord. I pay rent. But I mean, it's, I think this behavioural challenge is we've got obviously the technology that people now realise is okay. We've obviously, as we're talking about this whole thing of electrification, we've got to sort of decide you're interested in distribution of power, how it's bought, and how the generation side of it works. But getting people to change their mindsets about what actually heats them. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot. The myths, are people really taking them on board? And that's not. I think there's other variables going on, and like what you said there, people move house. So if they know they're going to move house in three years, they might not want to upset that whole thing of getting a new system. It don't work because then they've got to sell a house and the owners might not want to come into a home. So there's all sorts of things going on in people's. We like what we're used to as well. Most of us are all grown up now around central heating with a gas boiler or oil boiler, and it's we don't want to upset the status quo.
no, I mean, yeah.
How did
Um,
you get yours then?
how did I get it?
What made you decide you wanted one 3 years ago?
Oh, I mean, actually, my parents had a heat pump in the 90s, um,
Oh, we
which is quite
mentioned it.
unusual. Yeah. I've always known what they are,
Yeah.
but actually, yeah, my parents actually had an RHI one as well in the noughties, I guess. I,
Ah.
I I knew what the technologies were. I've always been interested in the energy system. Always
You
been.
grew up with one then?
Yeah, I think it did break eventually. Eventually got replaced with an oil boiler, but it was a ground source one, and it was pumping water out of a borehole, and I think it kind of salted or silted up somehow. It wasn't in the southwest; it was up in the Midlands. But yeah, I think one of the challenges is like it's kind of still the same today. It's kind of like there aren't enough installers that you can reliably get a repair. But just things like that kind of, it's not, you know, people think people I think a lot of people focus on the spark gap stuff, and I think that's really important. But there's kind of a wider kind of ecosystem of stuff around it. Like I've got a Mitsubishi one. Now I have the Havenwise app, which is pretty good, and a small team there have created a much better experience for operating an app that Mitsubishi have created in 10 or 12 years of running their app. There's things like that which kind of make it a better kind of overall experience. I think online forums and stuff like that to geeks like me have been helpful. But I'd acknowledge that they're probably not going to be there for everyone. I think AI is probably going to have an impact on helping people understand things or try and understand what's wrong with their. It's only a matter of time before most of the manufacturers will pipe the data from the heat pumps. Well, pipe, words. So you can kind of ask Claude or your Alexa, like, "Oh, something looks like it's wrong with my heat pump. Can you have a look at the flow temperatures, or not even can you have a look at the flow temperatures, but can you tell me what might be wrong?" Things like that are not too far away.
You've made me think, Ben. That's an interesting cohort that exists in society. So we've got like names for generations. You got well, the baby
The
boom
next
generation.
baby boomers, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, there's a cohort of you that grew up with these first sort of heat pump systems that were getting put in under the RHI and stuff like that, isn't it? There must be a
All
group
right.
of you around about your age that have grown up in households whose parents did have a heat pump back then.
Possibly.
Which is quite a nice cohort of people. If you got them all together, they'd be great advocates, wouldn't they? We all grew up with it.
Possibly. When I was a teenager, my parents lived on the coast of Cornwall. I mean, it was incredibly mild. Like, we would probably get one frosty year, you know, and we definitely didn't rely on it for everything. We had like a couple of fires as well. So, but no, I mean, there is other stuff. Like, I mean, I'm a bit of a, pragmatist on some of these things. Like, I've always thought that secondary heating is not such a bad idea, particularly in rural areas. I think in areas with gas that hybrids aren't awful, particularly if you've got the choice between someone getting a hybrid gas system and actually buying it, um, or like and saying, well, I'm going to have another gas boiler, and I would much rather that you can decarbonize 60 or 70% of what they're doing and do it now, rather than put them off entirely. I think there's also some benefits to the grid on that as well, because the times when it is cold, when the COPs are low, are really the times when the power prices are high as well. And that's true now, but it'll be true even more in a couple of years' time, when more people get heat pumps. So I'm a bit of a pragmatist around that. I think air to air is obviously getting a bit of a hearing now for the first time, which I think is really good. Um, that's probably going to appeal to a certain kind of consumer in a small property, or particularly in a flat. That I think's quite good. Like, I think air conditioning gets a bit demonized. I think it's not good for people to be stupidly hot, for their health. So yeah, I think that's good. I think the biggest challenge is, like, it's really difficult to install a heat pump. It requires people who are passionate, technical, really engaged with, like, a kind of quite intense week-long renovation of quite an important part of your home. And probably the rest of our society is kind of geared towards commoditizing and selling things which you can fix the price of, put in a checkout and buy straight away online. And that's kind of what the heat pump's competing with, and that's hard, and yeah, I'm sure you've had people in your guest quite a few times before who have gone, well, if I wanted a gas boiler, I'd go on saybox.com or British Gas or somewhere like that, and I could put it in a checkout, I could fix the price, and with a few kind of contingencies, probably know exactly what day it was going to be installed, and how much it was going to cost me. And unfortunately, you just can't do that with a heat pump, or you can't yet. And there's obviously been a lot of improvements in those things. I've seen the recent heat thing looks good. I've spoken to some of the other companies making installation software in the sector, Spruce, Carno, people like that. Like it's improving, but it's not quite as frictionless as buying a gas boiler in particular.
Mm.
And
No.
that, yeah, that's a shame. um,
Well, it's interesting how people, like I say, how they think about the heating system. And you mentioned something there that's always interests me. Doesn't get talked about a lot actually on the show. Secondary heating.
oh
So
yeah,
we always, well, a lot of the discussions I see, whether it's on LinkedIn, social media, or I'm involved in, it's all about right heating. We need to decarbonise. And I think people naturally think heating is just one or has to be one system, and historically, it's never really been like that. So I grew up in a rural area. You did. My dad was an oil boiler service engineer. He had 600 customers across 176 villages. Now he would have to have these heuristics. So at night, at our dinner table when we sat down as kids, poor old man, bless her. She would know that Dad's going to get a phone call that someone's going to have a boiler breakdown because all boilers go for a long, long time. So he could keep them going for years and years, and years. But you're going to get breakdowns. Now he would have to have mental heuristics because if they were elderly, he's going to go out. He's going to go out and repair that, and that might mean he's out to the early hours of the morning on dangerous roads. Really dangerous roads before mobile phones. Norfolk, as you might know, has massive drainage ditches. You can
yeah.
a van could fall down there and easily be covered up. No one would ever know. So he'd be driving around all these villages in a very sort of heavy van because he carried, with all boilers, you can basically, if you wanted to, you carry all the spares you need. You can't do that with gas boilers because he'd want to get people's heating going. Now, the heuristics he would use, and of course, it's all happening subconsciously, all these sort of decisions, whether he gets stuff off the dinner table to make it, go straight out. Some old people would have a secondary heat source, like a coal fire. And I've grown up with old people in their 80s who can light that fire in seconds. I mean, I know people, well, even my own age now, that wouldn't be able to start a fire in an open fireplace. But so he would know, right? Yeah, Mrs. So and so, she's okay. She's got a fire going. But he'd then have other heuristics like, she might have a fire, coal fire, but lost her husband the year before, and he said, right, she's going to probably be a bit. I'm going to get out there. I will, because there'll be a few calls coming in with breakdowns, and he's got to sort of make these mental judgments. Right, who gets him? Who does he go out to? So this whole secondary heat source thing has been around us a long time, and even things like an air to air. So I know a lot of people in rural properties, they could only have one air to air, one little mini split, and it's doing the living room space, and they can excuse me, as you can see, I'm a bit chilly, and so they could just use that for some of their winter days. That's the only thing they need on. Hot water was done by something else. And then on the really, really cold days, they might switch to their oil boiler. And really, really cold, or they'd run out of oil. They've got coal fire maybe, or wood burner, and they've got this one air to air. So when people say, excuse me again, when people say heat pumps can't work in rural properties, as a secondary heat source, they are really, really good. So I know a lot of farmers. I grew up working on farms, and they wouldn't mind the idea of a bit of a kit that only costs 500 quid. You've got an outside fan coil, an internal unit, and that can heat the main room they want for that day. They're happy with that.
Mm.
And we're stuck in this notion that something has to do, we have to have a system that's doing everything. And now that's not, we don't do that in other sort of systems. We have backup things and rah, rah, rah. I mean, like, even our very secure sites like hospitals and data centers, they've got backup systems of diesel generators mainly.
Yeah.
You can't do away with. You need backup systems. I know some have got hydrogen fuel cells, but most of them are out there are going to be diesel generators. They're everywhere.
You see them on my dashboard sometimes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
yet in domestic, we sort of don't think. Well, if a heat pump doesn't work when it's -5, well, you can just switch an electric fire on in your lounge for an hour or two and just get your temperature back up, and the job's done. The next day, it's not going to be as cold. But we don't tend to think like that, which is very interesting.
It's yeah. There's a couple of things there. I think firstly, like we switched from the RHI to the bus grant, didn't we, a few years ago? And I think the RHI was better suited to larger properties where you might have larger heating loads. But I think with the new kind of bus grant, they've got to be able to design to keep it at, is it 20 degrees or 21? I forget, something like that.
Yeah, internally.
Um, but of course, you could offer someone a slightly kind of cheaper install. You go, well, actually, if it goes below 3 or 4 degrees, you've got to light the fire. And actually, the quid pro quo of that is I'm not going to upgrade as many radiators, and the cost going to be half. Um, and maybe even in a rural area, I'm not going to have to upgrade you to three phase or something like that. And when you factor all those things together, again, it's a bit like kind of the kind of churn and the funnel where you lose people that might have gone for a hybrid but not a full system. There are people that will go, well, yeah, I don't really care if you can't keep the hot house at 21 degrees when it's -2. Like, firstly, I'll wear a jumper. Second, I'll light the fire. And actually, when you think about it again, the next thing is, apart from the capital costs, actually, if you can run the heat pump softer, not full output, when it is quite cold, and you get a cop improvement as well. Um, but I know that people could twist those words to suggest I'm advocating that everyone in every suburb should have a wood fire, and I'm not. But one of the things when I was doing the Common 13 program last year, one of the things I prototyped and spoke with a couple of people was like a kind of retrofit kind of estimator tool, and a couple of the people I tested it with lived in rural properties. And in common with others, I kind of used the energy performance certificates and stuff like that for buildings. And one of the findings that came back over and over again was, you look at the EPC, you infer a really big heat loss on a building, and you say to someone, well, at the moment you must be using 5 tanks of oil a year, and they look at you and they laugh and they go, no, I use two of you, if I'm lucky, and that's because I've got the fire. So actually, with that person, like, if you start with very, very high heat loss, you're gold plating before, you kind of even get over the threshold in terms of like what you might be proposing to install there. And I'm sure there's a lot of people would look at that and kind of quite pragmatically go, kind of no thanks. you know. Um, so yeah, I do think it'd be nice if whatever systems for subsidizing and supporting heat pumps we get that come in, it'd be nice if they were more flexible.
Well,
And I mean that not in the, well, not in terms of the grid necessarily, although I do mean that, but I just mean like in terms of like the menu of options that people get.
as an economist, this is kind of your area, isn't it? How schemes, well, they're upfronting some costs for the homeowner, aren't they? So, I mean, do these schemes work? Do you think the scheme could be better? Are there other sort of types of schemes that you'd think would have worked better?
I mean, it could be my kind of area. I have a lot of hats, and yeah, I am an economist. I set the student think tank when I was at Cambridge. It's certainly an area I'm interested in, and I've worked on policy things over the years. I don't know, like I think you've always got to design something that fits 25 million homes, right? So it's not the easiest thing to do. Certainly in my mind, the RHI had downsides, but probably um, I think particularly with like um, the APIs and the real-time data that you get coming back from heat pumps, and um, the opportunities to do things like flexing for the grid. I think it's a bit of a shame that we went completely wholesale for a solution where you just get an upfront grant
Mm.
and no kind of tying back to the monitoring and the performance of the heat pump. Um, Obviously, I think we chatted about this on LinkedIn before, but like I think like everyone else in the industry, I'm a big fan of the heat pump monitor website and the way that you get real time, consistent,
Oh, we should talk about that.
independent data, kind of stuff like that. I think is really
Oh, they're brilliant.
really
They,
helpful.
they should get an award, which I've said, and you and I were chatting about it the other day.
Yeah.
There is there's a government website where you can nominate someone for, because there's so many awards in it. I'm going to have to do a newsletter about. There's so many awards in this industry now. It's beyond a joke, and it's all PR and marketing. It's quite a weird. But
A
you
lot
get,
of people pay for their awards, don't they? I'm imagining those guys have
trust
probably
me,
got
I can talk a
principals
lot
not
about
to.
awards. There's some strange things going on in that world at the moment. But when you get people like Tristan and Glenn, who've done something so good, so
Yeah.
helpful, so useful.
Yeah.
There's about 20 awards out there now. You think one of them pick up on it and think, right, they deserve an award. No, the way they're managed, it's all like I say, it's about money. You're buying tables. If you're buying tables, you're probably going to. I'm not going to discuss it at the moment because I've got to fact check a lot of stuff. But the awards thing, I don't think is. I've just done a newsletter about marketing actually, funny enough today, um, about the loyalty schemes that boiler companies use. But this whole thing of awards going on at the moment in our sector, because our sector's grown and grown. It's not just heating anymore that we sort of grew up with. It's the whole energy piece now. So us energy and heating engineers are seeing our industry get bigger and bigger and bigger with all these different wonderful sorts of people involved. And of course, all the PR companies and anyone that has an award is picking up on this. And there's awards here, there, and everywhere. And then you get people like Tristan Glynn that should have won one, haven't won one yet, and they've helped a lot of a lot of different types of cohorts in this sector, including the people that managed the electrification heat project because they collected the data but didn't really know what to do with it as well as what those guys did. I won't go there. Ben, it's been fantastic having you on the show. We've done about an hour and a half. I'm glad you talked mostly because I'm very chesty, as you can tell. Um,
It's the first week of January. It's to be expected.
it is the first week. We're still in the first week, aren't we? Oh, there you go. I lose days over the Christmas period. It's time sort of does a funny thing over the Christmas period. They sort of merge into one, don't they? But no, thank you ever so much for coming on the show. I'll just mention your website again. It's kilowatts.io. Is that right? IO, not IU.
That's it, yeah.
IO. Kilowatts.io. And you can go and look at this very aesthetically pleasing dashboard that's moving about and wriggling about in real time. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, pleasure. Bye.